Brett, I have to do what's right. I said to my people, we just hit 50,000 on the Dow. That wasn't supposed to happen for 5 or 6 years. I did it in my first year. We just hit 7,000 on the S&P. That wasn't supposed. That was even less of a chance than the Dow. It was just announced 401ks are at the all-time highest that they've ever been. All these things happened, and I said, I'm sorry to do this to you, but we have to stop this group of very crazy people.
That's Donald Trump touting the stock market as proof that the war with Iran has not greatly impacted people's finances. But his claim comes as the latest economic data shows that the financial squeeze on Americans is very real. The average price for a gallon of gas is now $4.51. That's nearly 50 cents higher than a month ago and over $1.30 more than this time last year. Let's remember, this is Memorial Day at the end of the week here. Summer travel season's beginning. Meanwhile, inflation hit 3.8% last month, rising at the highest rate in 3 years, driven in large part by those gas prices. Businesses are also facing higher costs. A key measure watched by economists, known as the Producer Price Index, had the highest one-month increase since March of 2022. Welcome to the fourth hour of Morning Joe, just past the top of the hour. Pablo Torre back with us, and we have a lot past the top of the hour. Pablo Torre back with us, and we have a lot to get to this hour, so let's dive right in. The president is once again issuing an apocalyptic threat to Iran. Trump posting on Truth Social yesterday, the clock is ticking, and they better get moving fast, or there won't be anything left of them. That familiar, ominous warning came shortly after the president spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the situation in Iran. Now from the Middle East to Europe, where Ukraine is escalating its attacks on Russia, hitting Moscow with the deadliest strike in that city since Vladimir Putin's full-fledged invasion began more than 4 years ago. 3 people were killed and at least a dozen injured Saturday in drone strikes on the Russian capital and some surrounding areas. Russia's defense ministry claimed that more than 550 drones were shot down across the country over the weekend. The bombardment came just days after a Russian attack killed at least 24 people in Kyiv. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense has canceled the planned deployment of more than 4,000 troops to Poland, a move in Eastern Europe that certainly would appear to help Russia. The New York Times reports it's unclear why Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth canceled that deployment to Poland. A Pentagon spokesperson has declined to comment on the decision. It comes, though, after the DoD announced another withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany, which was seen as a direct response to a comment from Germany's chancellor saying that Iran has humiliated the United States. And now from Europe to Asia, we keep going across the map, where President Trump seems to be leaving another ally in limbo, suggesting in an interview with Fox News last week that a potential multi-billion-dollar weapons sale to Taiwan could now instead be used as a negotiating chip with China.
Should the people of Taiwan feel more or less secure after your meeting? But you're waiting on approving billions of dollars of weapons for Taiwan.
That's right.
Is that
I'm
moving forward?
Well, I haven't approved it yet. We're going to see what happens.
What are you looking for?
I may do it. I may not do it.
Yeah, what's your hinge point?
Well, I'm not going to say that, but I may do it. I may not do it. But we're not looking to have wars, and if you kept it the way it is, I think China's going to be okay with that. But we're not looking to have somebody say, let's go independent because the United States is backing us. You know,
so President Xi probably liked that you haven't approved the weapons to Taiwan.
I would say like is maybe too strong a word because he thinks I could do it with just the signing of my signature, unlike Biden who couldn't sign his signature. No, I'm holding that in abeyance, and it depends on China. It depends. It's a very good negotiating chip for us, frankly. It's a lot of weapons. It's $12 billion. It's a lot of weapons.
And here at home, President Trump is again defending his recent comments about the financial situation that Americans are facing as a result of the war with Iran. Here's what Trump said last week.
To what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about American financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that motivates.
A ready-made campaign ad there. The president told Fox News on Friday that it was actually a perfect statement, and he would make it again. Here's what else Trump had to say about rising costs.
Very simple. When people hear me say it, everybody agrees. Short-term pain, it's going to be short-term pain, but the pain is much short-term pain. It's going to be short-term pain, but the pain is much less than people thought, because people thought that the oil would go up to $250. You know, it was $99 yesterday, $99 a barrel. I thought it might go up to $200. I was okay with that. Not that I wanted it, but you cannot let them have a nuclear weapon. They will use it on us. They'll start off with Israel, wipe it out. The Middle East, wipe it out. It'll go to Europe. When you tell somebody you're going to have to pay a little more, not that much more, a little more for gasoline for a very short period of time, because we want to stop the threat of being blown to pieces by a lunatic, by a crazy person, and they are crazy, using nuclear weapons. Everybody says that's fine. And that question was a fake question, and they didn't put my full answer. I totally care.
Mr. President, we did just play your full answer there. And Pablo, I mean, this is real. The numbers don't lie here, despite what Trump likes to bluster past. And sure, the stock market's been good, but the stock market is not the full economy for many Americans, and poll after poll suggests they're hurting, and they blame him.
Yeah, and there are so many things that I think are obvious that he could be doing differently when it comes to messaging. And so the great man theory of Donald Trump has this unique handle on the American psyche, and for some reason, why is he not actually seemingly in touch with his base anymore? Why isn't he behaving rationally? It brings us to, I think, this larger sweep of not just news, but also, frankly, physiological data points, John, that you may or may not have chronicled in your new piece for The Atlantic, which continues to haunt me now that I've read it all synthesized in almost chronological order.
Yeah, I wrote today, out just a couple hours ago, about the President Trump and sort of the increased scrutiny he's getting about his age. He turns 80 next month. And it's been very different than President Biden. That was obviously a huge storyline throughout his 4 years. You know, were people wondering, was he up for the job? Was he too old for the job? His aides insisting that he was. Debate in Atlanta, his deficiencies burst out of the open. It's a little different from Trump. He's louder. He's bigger.
Sure.
It's not, the changes are not as obvious, but I do detail in the piece. There's some health concerns in terms of the strangeness with the hands, the falling asleep in the meetings, the late night Truth Social bursts where he's clearly not sleeping in the middle of the night. But it's also about erratic behavior in terms of being out of touch, perhaps, with the American people, losing his sort of that superpower he had to have his finger on the pulse of what people cared about. But also just the threats to reporters, the apocalyptic threats to Iran. The list goes on. And they've made some adjustments to his schedule. You know, no morning events. He wears more comfortable shoes now. He's largely seated for events. He's really cut down on travel. So this is becoming a growing storyline, and including among Republicans who are privately whispering, you know, President Trump, he is getting older. As 80 approaches, as he has another physical ahead of him in a couple of weeks, you know, is he now more concerned about his legacy and his more unfiltered version of himself, and therefore not what the people want?
Well, the question is he a liability? And you know, in fairness, I want to quote what I believe the White House spokesman said. Here's where you're wrong, Jonathan. And he pointed out that no one has been more active in the public, right? That's what they hang their hat on, is that he is still out here. But the question is that actually hurting now as opposed to helping?
And so far, within the party, it still helps. We saw him defeat Senator Cassidy in Louisiana in the primary. You know, Indiana, his selections won their primary races. But yes, come November, that could be a different matter. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida. He's a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, we have a million things we could talk to you about. We'll ask you to put your Foreign Affairs Committee hat on first. In terms of the situation in Iran, we know the domestic toll. Situation in Iran, we know the domestic toll. President Trump could deny it, but the rising prices are real here in the United States. And now we know that he's assembling his National Security Council and other advisors tomorrow to consider perhaps resuming hostilities with Iran. The end goal of that, unclear, however. Has Congress been told anything as to what might come next?
No, thanks, John, and thanks for having me. No, Congress has not been told anything. And obviously, while myself and many others don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and then we want to make sure they don't have a ballistic missile shield, which allows themselves to build a nuclear weapon, at the same time, Congress has not been allowed to even vote on the war, right? We've tried several times. You know, this is the Article 1 authority for our Congress to do that. We've tried now 3 times to do that. We're beyond the 60 days. We're beyond war powers. And so it's Congress's role to go ahead and take that vote up or down. We've not even been allowed to do that. So no, Congress is not in the loop at all of what is happening. We know what the American people know. And I sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We've not even had any hearings, quite frankly, on the war or the excursion, as the president calls it, at all in the months that have been going on. So no, Congress knows nothing more than the American people know.
Well, perhaps President Trump is touting the stock market because he himself is benefiting from it. Congressman, we want to get your reaction to this story. Frankly, a story that would be one of the biggest nearly any other day. Bloomberg reporting and others that President Trump has been a prolific stock trader through the first quarter of this year. Newly released disclosures show that he made 3,700 trades, more than 40 a day, which is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Many of those trades involve companies with businesses before his administration. Now, the disclosure did not give specific dollar amounts, but Reuters reports the list shows a cumulative value between $220 million and around $750 million. The president, very interested in tech stocks, buying at least $1 million each in Apple, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Oracle. He also made large sales of between $5 and $25 million of Amazon and Meta. Bloomberg also notes that 6 of Trump's trades involved Intel. Trump's administration hammered out an agreement in August to take a 10% stake for nearly $9 billion in that chip maker. Bloomberg also points out that Trump is the first president to trigger the disclosure requirement. Neither former President Obama, whose money was invested in treasury bills and broadly diversified mutual funds, nor Joe Biden traded any stocks or bonds while in office. And Congressman, President Trump's not just trading, over 3,700 trades. And one of the through lines of this administration is his ability, he and his family's ability to profit off of his time in office. This seems to be one of the most egregious examples yet.
Well, and actually, John, we have a bill in Congress that I'm on to ban stock trading for the legislative branch. The reason why that bill has not been able to move at the moment is because Democrats also want to put in that bill to ban stock trading at the executive branch level for the president and the vice president. And Republicans are refusing to ban stock trading for the executive branch. By the way, there's one difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch. We don't give out any contracts in the legislative branch. The executive branch gives out all the contracts. So they know who is going to get the contracts. They award the contracts. They have procurement teams. They know who's going to win it. They know the value of those contracts beforehand. The executive branch knows all that in every department, the Pentagon, Homeland, Education, you name it, transportation. The legislative branch doesn't know any of that stuff. So the president has all that information where the legislative branch doesn't have any of that information. But look, this is obviously something the American people are very clear on. Look, myself and many others in Congress have stock portfolios that are managed by outside people. But that's why I'm on the bill, because I think the American people want transparency in this process. They don't want to have to worry whether you have any inside information. By the way, most of us don't. But it doesn't matter. It's time for Congress to ban stock trading, which is why I'm on the bill.
Yeah, certainly more attention to that issue in light of these disclosures from the president. Congressman, you also revealed this week that you've recently become the victim of a series of anti-Semitic threats, and you released the audio of a number of horrifying messages left on your office voicemail. We'd like to warn our viewers that what you are about to hear is extremely disturbing, but we think it's important for there to be full transparency to really understand the terrible nature of these threats. Let's listen.
Hey, you Zionist, you pig. Oh, no, they want more civilian deaths. Well, if it's Israel civilians, yeah, sure. How about 9 million of them? Trains are boarding to Germany, showers available on request.
The U.S. government needs to kill Jews. You kill these nasty Jews.
Truly horrific, Congressman. We're certainly sorry you had to experience that. Please talk to us about your feelings about the personal threats, but frankly also just this larger moment where we see anti-Semitism really on the rise.
Sure, Jonathan. Here are my feelings. My feelings are we've totally passed the Rubicon now on anti-Semitism, and we're not going back. This is the new normal for Jews in America right now. People say, well, look, we should be able to criticize the Israeli government. Of course, go criticize them. And people say, well, but the problem is they're the ones conflating it, not us. They're the ones, as you see, they go right from Zionist to Jews super quick. And, you know, the anti-Netanyahu movement is more than happy to embrace all of these anti-Semites. In fact, I feel like it's every day now that Mamdani has to put a tweet out. The mayor of New York has to put a tweet out that he's very sorry about the anti-Semitic attacks in New York, and the NYPD is working on it. It's not just me. It's all of the Jewish members in Congress are getting this. I have someone serving 25 years, a constituent of mine who had an assassination plot against me last year. You know, we're at the point now where most Jewish members have security outside their house. Members of Congress, members of the Senate have to have security outside their house, have to have security where they go. Every synagogue in this country, temple in this country has to have security outside of it. Soon, Jonathan, you know, Jewish-owned businesses will have security outside of them. You'll see delis have to have security outside of them. That is the trajectory we are on. And we're on that trajectory for two reasons. One, we're allowing foreign countries to just own the social media space and fill Americans' minds with propaganda to foment this problem. You know, if Hitler had TikTok, I don't know that any Jew would have ever survived, quite frankly. It is the ultimate propaganda tool, and we're seeing propaganda just on that, on X. And the second reason it's spreading so quickly is because a lot of really good people who hate what's happening are being quiet. It's not their issue. Gas is $5.50. They got a lot going on. We need people to speak up. These are the things that my grandmother, who was part of the Kindertransport out of Germany and survived, her parents were killed in Auschwitz. These were the things that were starting to happen in the 30s. Before what happened in Germany. And I'm not saying we're on that trajectory, but I'm saying there are similarities. And the similarities are it's starting again. Jews are the other. We're not just being blamed for Netanyahu. We're being blamed for the world's problems. We're being blamed for economic problems in this country. We're being blamed for, you know, Middle East. We're being blamed for Iran, even though the Gulf states, you know, want that to happen. We're being blamed for everything. It's not new. It's as old as time, but it is spreading fast in this country. This country saved my grandparents, saved a lot of people. That's why people from around the world want to come here. But we are, Jonathan, turning into a place now where anti-Semitism is growing. It's a major problem. I can give you all sorts of the statistics among young people. The statistics don't matter. It's feelings that Jews have. They're having to put their Jewish stars away. You know, Jews are starting to hide in this country. And that is the telltale sign that we are on a very scary trajectory.
Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida, thank you. We really appreciate you bringing this to us this morning.
Thank you.
Older Jonathan Lemire. I read your article, and I think you're so right. Any suggestion that Donald Trump has dementia or is losing mind, whatever, it's ridiculous. I said the same thing about Joe Biden. Went and talked to him for 3 hours, and yes, from your article is that for the president who's about to turn 80 this next month, for a president who has always been erratic, as he turns 80, we are seeing some diminished capacities with anybody who would turn 80. But that erraticism, we are seeing it exaggerated. And I wonder if that's what we see playing out, where he's just not just saying the quiet part out loud, he's screaming it. He wants to abandon our Polish allies. He wants to abandon Ukraine as he continues to do. He wants to abandon our German allies. He wants to do everything he can do to help Vladimir Putin, because make no mistake of it, all the people that have been going around yelling, Russia hoax, Russia hoax, Russia hoax, and will be triggered by this because of their own unique version of Trump derangement syndrome. What you actually have is a president doing everything that Vladimir Putin would want him to do. Just ask anybody that's been in this field, that's been in for Vladimir Putin couldn't call these shots any better himself. And so whatever draws him to Vladimir Putin, whatever drew him to Putin in his 70s, it seems to be even more exaggerated now as he turns 80.
Yeah, we can dig into my piece as the morning goes on. But one thing that really struck me is that there was so much conversation about Joe Biden aging, in part because Joe Biden so visibly changed. He got quieter. He got sort of smaller. It seemed like he was frailer. And while Donald Trump, you know, he still physically sort of looks the same. Yes, there are the bruises on his hands, and yes, he falls asleep frequently now in the Oval. Yes, he falls asleep frequently now in the Oval Office, but he's a big person, he's a big presence, and he's loud. And that has allowed him to skate past accusations that he might be, in fact, aging or declining. But what's really here, and people I've talked to suggest that as he has aged, he has even less and less of a filter. Now, let's be clear. Donald Trump has never been one for self-censoring, but he is someone who now is more purely himself as he ages. It's disinhibition. There's whatever pops in his head, he says, and he also relies more and more, as you just said, Joe, falls back on these instincts, one of them being reflexively sort of, you know, deference to strongmen, whether that is Xi Jinping in China. We saw that on vivid display last week, and certainly for a decade or more, what we have seen with Vladimir Putin. And there really is no other reason for this. As Michael just laid out, and as David has laid out, as you and I talk about on the show on a near daily basis, Ukraine's made real strides in this war. They, in fact, have so many of the cards, and yet they're still in the White House, from Trump himself and in his top officials, this sort of reflexive, oh, Russia's going to win this, when frankly, all evidence points to the other direction.
And I must say that Michael has been saying it, I've been saying it, Ann Applebaum has been saying it. That's been a lie that they've been carrying for a year now. And make no mistake, right now, if you want to know where the Ukrainians are, they're not just on the front lines. They're all across the Gulf region, because guess what? Everybody is asking them about the future of warfare and how they defend themselves against the war that Donald Trump started with Iran. Still at our morning show. First of all, we're going to get Sam Stein's insights on all of this, even though this last segment may have been Sam's greatest yet. But coming up, new reporting on Cuba, recently acquiring hundreds of military drones, asymmetric warfare with leaders there discussing plans to attack U.S. targets. Mark Caputo of Axios joins us straight ahead, and we'll get David Ignatius' insights as well. Plus, there are new ethics questions concerning Donald Trump's massive number of recent stock trades and the timing of those trades. We're going to dig into that. And as we go to break, a quick look at the traveler's forecast this morning from AccuWeather's Bernie Rayno. Bernie, is spring here for good? Because summer's just around the corner.
Joe, we have a severe weather outbreak late today. Cities like Des Moines, Kansas City, Wichita, Kansas, strong thunderstorm in Chicago this morning. AccuWeather says beautiful day in Boston, warm. It feels like August. New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., warm and humid across the southeast. A few spotty thunderstorms. Some strong thunderstorms late today in Oklahoma City and Dallas. Traveling along the East Coast, just Miami, some minor delays this afternoon. To help you make the best decisions and be more in the know, download.
Welcome back. A new report from Axios reveals that Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and could be preparing to use them. How Cuba has started discussing plans to possibly use the drones to attack the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay, U.S. military vessels, and Key West in Florida, which sits just 90 miles north of Havana. And Mark joins us now. Great reporting, Mark. We know that John Ratcliffe was down in Cuba, the director of the CIA, just last week. Is this part of the reason that he was down there, to say to the Cubans, don't even try this? Because clearly the Cubans, as is every other small country in the world, is studying asymmetric warfare at the moment.
Yeah, my understanding, the answer to that is yes. One of the sources we spoke to for this story said that this was specifically raised by Ratcliffe when he met with his Cuban counterparts down in Havana. It was also sort of a show of force for him to go down there. There's two ways to look at why the United States is coming out with this information now. And notably, Cuba is not denying it has the drones. It's just denying it would use them in an offensive way. It's saying it would only react to an aggression, that is suggesting they would use them defensively. As the United States either wants to put more pressure on the regime in Havana to come up with a deal and tell them, hey, we know what you have here, and so let's make a deal. Or B, this could be a pretext for war, for an invasion, as Sam had just mentioned. What's pretty clear is that though there have been talks, the talks haven't been that fruitful, and the United States just keeps piling pressure on pressure on pressure on the regime in Havana. Not only did they happen to mention to us this report and this information about Cuba's national drone program and drone technology, on Wednesday there are plans to formally indict Raul Castro for the 1996 shootdown of two aid planes from a group called Brothers to the Rescue that are based in Miami. And then there are various sanctions that are And then there are various sanctions that are being imposed in an increasingly difficult way on Havana that are starting to penalize private companies, foreign companies, that are doing business there and taking more and more money out of the already broke country. They barely have any fuel. In some streets in Havana, the only lights that are now on are from trash fires that people are burning. It's a very difficult situation, and it looks like it's going to get worse.
Mark, this is David Ignatius in Washington. I want to ask you two things. Those of us who are old enough to remember 1962 think that the introduction of any kind of new offensive weapons into Cuba is potentially very dangerous. Cuban Missile Crisis stuff. So first question is whether you get the sense that it's being taken that seriously by the Trump administration. Second question, this talk about indicting Raul Castro obviously reminds us of Venezuela and the essentially the kidnapping of the then Venezuelan President Maduro. Do you see that as being in the early stages of actually being planned?
As for the first part, the Cuban Missile Crisis comparison, these aren't nuclear weapons. The United States, the sources that we spoke to said that though this is a concern, and it's a concern that there are IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members from Iran who are in Havana, who do advise the regime that they're there and they don't want them there with these drones, that it's just not as much of a threat, say, as having a nuclear weapon. As for the second part, the indictment of Castro does certainly have these echoes to the operation in Venezuela. The difference that I think people need to understand between Venezuela and Cuba from the United States perspective is that Cuba is people you can do business there with. In this case, Castro is a de facto dictator. He sort of says yes and no to various ideas to move the nation forward, but it's ruled sort of by a Politburo, and there are just not people there who want to make a deal with the United States. They've been in a Cold War with the U.S. since 1959, and so far there are no indications that they're going to move forward. Now, there are plans, obviously, to invade Cuba. There are plans not to invade Cuba. This is what the Pentagon does, and Trump hasn't made that decision. I'm being told, at least in the short term, that until the situation in Iran gets resolved, we're not going to see action in Cuba. But I ask, well, what does that mean, the situation in Iran get resolved, and what's the timeline? There's no answer for that. And, you know, it's Trump. Tomorrow he could suddenly decide, hey, let's invade Cuba, and it's going to happen. Or he could decide not to do anything, and therefore it won't.
You know, it's Trump, which seems to be the kind of motto of this second administration. The new report's available online now at Axios. White House reporter for Axios, Mark Caputo, thank you so much for joining us. Editor at The Insider, Michael Weiss, thank you as well for getting up early on this Monday morning. And coming up, President Trump is defending his comment from last week that he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation amid the war with Iran. We'll play that for you.
So as I reflected upon that and I began to think about it, I thought, well, even if there is no handbook for how to be a first lady, why not just use my own experience, trust in my own integrity, and do it the way that I want to do it? I mean, shouldn't all of us who are in some sort of a role with the outdated expectations or stereotypes do exactly the same thing?
That was former First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid, delivering a unique TED Talk back in 2019 on what it means to take on such a public role with very little prior experience. It's also the subject of Reid's new memoir, titled The First Lady Next Door, in which she details her time developing her own identity while juggling being in the public eye and the mom of 4 kids. MSNOW contributor Huma Abedin and New York Times opinion writer Mara Gay recently spoke to Reid about the book, the challenges that came with her role, and some funny moments that stick with her still today. Take a look.
Iceland has ranked #1 in the world for gender equality for a decade. And then you tell these stories about being with your husband, the president,
yes,
and men actually ignoring you. How did you power through that?
Well, you know, it was very interesting all of a sudden to be thrust on the national stage after a 7-week presidential campaign on my husband's first foray into public office. And then you become nationally known as Goodney's wife. And I thought, what happened to Eliza in this whole process? And I think you sort of realize that you really have to start taking up the space, not just physically take up the space, but in space, not just physically take up the space, but in your presence and what you're doing, and to make sure that your voice is heard. And that's really what I tried to do in the 8 years that I served as First Lady of Iceland.
What do you think was the biggest thing that you learned that first year?
Oh my gosh, there were so many, the first year all the time, because there's no instruction manual on how to do this, right? There's no rule book or guidelines, and you feel, I love fault. Like if I buy a toaster, I read the instructions on how to use the toaster, you know? So I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. And I think the biggest thing I learned was, at first I was nervous and excited, but thinking, what if I break a rule or do it wrong? And what I learned was, if there are no rules, you can't be breaking any rules. And if you sort of switch that on its head a bit, it gave me, in my mind, more leeway to try to really use the unexpected opportunity that I had and the platform that I had.
And what are you hearing from women when you are traveling on your book tour? What is the reaction that you're getting to the story?
Really positive, actually. And I think what the fun thing about the story is because I hope it's sort of an every woman's story. You know, it's unexpected. As I said, 7-week campaign. I grew up in Canada, you know, never expected that I would end up the First Lady of Iceland. And it's kind of nerve-wracking when you face even these positive changes in our life. And so what I've been trying to say is that even these positive changes can feel uncomfortable, but if we really want to grow as people, if we really want to maximize that, we have to lean into that uncomfortable feeling. And I think very few people end up married to a head of state, but a lot of people can relate to the idea of feeling a bit like a fish out of water, feeling a little bit uncomfortable when they encounter these moments and changes. And so what I want to try to say is that it's healthy. You should lean into those changes to make the most of it.
Eliza, one thing that was shocking was you talk about world leaders not even bothering to shake your hand or acknowledge you in rooms where you happen to be with your husband, I assume, on official state business, in what has become a very reactionary moment, unfortunately, for women's rights globally.
We certainly, yeah, I mean, and that's a huge issue in and of itself, of course, and that's why I think that no matter the circumstance, we need to hear women's voices more and not less. Those situations, that wasn't world leaders, I would say, it was people we were hosting at receptions, but various
That's almost
backgrounds.
worse.
Right, and again, it would be people in a receiving line, they'd shake my husband's hand and kind of walk by me. And the interesting thing was, nobody was doing that on purpose, I'm sure. No one is deliberately trying to do this. They're just excited that they've just met the president. They're excited to get a glass of bubbly in the next room or whatever it was. And I realized, even though I'm a human being standing there, and this wasn't most people, it was a few people, I wasn't taking up that space. And the great thing is there's a quick fix to that. The quick fix is when someone shakes his hand and comes to me, and then I say, welcome, and really make a point of using my voice and being there. It doesn't put someone on the spot. Everybody shakes your hand. So there's little ways, they're just microaggressions, but they can really add up. And I think there's little ways of acknowledging that so that we take up the space and so that we can really make a difference.
You actually talk about those microaggressions a lot because of the frustration you feel throughout the book. The unexpectedness of your being put in this position, I think, comes through in these very funny stories when President Biden takes your phone to call your mother, for example. There is an especially funny story when you're on a bus in a gown and have a little bit of a wardrobe malfunction.
Yes.
Tell us about that story.
I will. I'll tell it kind of in a nutshell. It's short, but we were going to a white tie gala dinner for the then Crown Prince of Denmark's birthday party, which just saying that sentence as a girl from small town Canada feels very, very strange. And it turns out it was brought to my attention that the sash that I was wearing over my gala dress was over the wrong shoulder, which doesn't sound so significant unless the sash may have been sewn to one shoulder so that it doesn't slip off. But very fortunately, the Queen of the Netherlands had some double-sided tape, which I'm told is wonderful to travel with all the time if one finds oneself in this situation. And then I realized that the sort of ceremonially clad Danish aide de camp who pointed this out to me had a ceremonial dagger as part of his uniform. And so on the bus, I asked to borrow this knife and handed it to the Queen of the Netherlands, who delicately cut off the sash, and we flipped it over and avoided a major diplomatic incident. But it was one of those moments when you're sitting there thinking, is this really my life? Is this what has happened?
Always have double-sided tape.
Always have double-sided tape.
I love that. I love your sense of humor. And I'm wondering what led you to want to write this book. Seems like you are a storyteller by nature, so maybe that has something to do with it.
That's a great point, I think, too, because right now I really think we need to be hearing each other's stories more, because that's what helps us to connect with each other so well. And for me, writing this story, as I said, it was so unexpected. It's kind of like someone said, you should write a guide to being a first lady because there's no such thing. And I said, no, that's too specific. But what I can do is write a book that helps people to get to feel confident when they face these moments, because the point is to say that we're all going to have moments in life that we don't expect. But if we trust that really through living our lives, we've built up some kind of toolkit of experiences that can help us in these moments, even if they seem completely different from what we did, then that's something that we can use. And I do have to say, I called out, these microaggressions and tried to use my voice because I knew people would listen to me. But it was such a wonderful honor and a privilege the whole time.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على الحبيب الذي أجاءنا هدى يا رب بالنور أكرم مهجتي واغفر ذنوبي وهون كربتي أنت الرجاء إذا ضاقت بنا الدنيا وبذكرك العالي تحيا روحنا الله يا مولانا أنت الرحيم وأنت هادينا الله يا رحمن بنورك اجعل قلوبنا إيمان صلوا على طه الرسول محمد خير البرية والنور المؤيد من بالصلاة عليه نال راحة والقلب من أنواره يتجدد يا ربنا اجعلنا على درب الهدى واختم بالخيرات أعمارنا مدى مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على الحبيب المصطفى